I am Ebony, 29 years old. 5 years ago, I was just a ghost in my own family. The air in Atlanta was biting cold that Christmas Eve, the kind of chill that seeps right through your bones. I had just finished a 16-hour double shift at the manufacturing plant. My hands were raw, my back was aching, and I smelled like a mixture of industrial lubricant and sweat. But I did not care. I was 24, hungry for approval, and I had just finished the prototype for a robotic arm that I knew would change the industry. I drove my beat-up sedan to my grandmother Lucille's house, the heater broken, shivering the whole way. I parked down the street so my rusty car would not offend her neighbors. I walked up the driveway clutching a small gift bag containing a scarf I had knitted myself during my lunch breaks. I reached for the front doorknob, eager for the warmth inside. The door swung open before I could touch it. But it was not a warm welcome. It was Courtney, my brother Dante's wife. She stood there in a silk dress that cost more than my car, blocking the entrance with her body. Her nose wrinkled immediately, as if she had just smelled a dead animal. "Oh, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with that fake southern charm that cuts deeper than a knife. "You cannot come in through the front. Not looking like that." I looked down at my coveralls. They were stained with oil and metal dust. I had come straight from the shop because I did not want to be late. "Courtney, it is 10 degrees out here," I said, my teeth chattering. "I just want to say Merry Christmas to Grandma." She pulled a can of cheap floral air freshener from behind her back and actually sprayed it in my direction. The mist hit my face, stinging my eyes. "You smell like a gas station, Ebony. It is embarrassing. The senator might stop by later. We cannot have the house smelling like manual labor. Go around to the back and take those boots off outside. I do not want grease on the Persian rug." She slammed the heavy oak door in my face. I stood there for a moment, the artificial smell of lavender mixing with the cold air. I could hear laughter inside. Warmth, light. I walked through the snow to the back door, my boots crunching on the ice. My fingers were numb as I unlaced my heavy steel toe work boots on the freezing concrete patio. I stepped into the kitchen in my socks, feeling the cold tile bite into my feet. I was inside, but I had never felt more outside in my life. I tried to make myself invisible as I walked into the dining room. The table was set with Grandma Lucille's finest china, the gold-rimmed plates she only used for people she respected. My brother Dante was sitting at the head of the table, swirling a glass of red wine. He was wearing a suit that I knew was leased, and a gold watch that looked heavy on his wrist. Grandma Lucille was beaming at him. She looked like a queen holding court, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. "Tell us again about the investment, Dante," she said, her eyes shining with pride. Dante leaned back, soaking in the attention. "Oh, it is just a little merger," I advised on Grandma. "High-level finance. You know how it is. We move millions with a click of a button. The market is volatile, but I tamed it." He winked at Courtney, who was now seated next to him, looking at him like he was a god. I knew for a fact Dante had been fired from the bank 3 months ago for incompetence, but nobody asked me. I sat in the only empty chair, the wobbly one near the kitchen swing door. Grandma finally noticed me. She did not say hello. She just looked at my socks. "Ebony, I hope you washed your hands," she said sharply. "I did, Grandma," I said quietly. "I actually have some news too." Courtney let out a small, sharp giggle. "Did you get a promotion to head janitor?" The table erupted in laughter. My face burned hot. I gripped the tablecloth under the table. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I finished the prototype today. The hydraulic system is stable. My boss said if it passes the stress test, we could be looking at a patent." I looked at Grandma, hoping for just a crumb of the pride she gave Dante. Just a nod. Anything. She slammed her fork down onto her plate. The clatter made everyone jump. "Stop it, Ebony," she hissed. I froze. "Stop what?" "Stop talking about machines and grease and dirt," she said, her voice trembling with disgust. "We are eating filet mignon. We are discussing high finance and the future of this family. I will not have my dinner ruined by talk of your blue-collar hobbies. Screws and bolts do not belong at this table." "But Grandma..." This is engineering, I tried to explain. It is important. It is labor, she spat out the word like it was poison. You chose to work with your hands like a common servant while your brother works with his mind. If you want to talk about factory work, go eat in the kitchen with the help. Dante smirked, slicing into his steak. You heard her, sis. Don't bore us with your little science project. Leave the success talk to the adults. I looked around the table. My mother wouldn't meet my eyes. My cousins were looking at their phones. Courtney was inspecting her manicure, looking bored. I realized then that it didn't matter what I built. To them, I would always be the dirt on their shoes. I picked up my fork, but the food turned to ash in my mouth. I didn't know then that this was the last meal I would eat in this house for 5 years. And I certainly didn't know that the little science project Grandma despised was about to make me the wealthiest woman in Georgia. After the dinner plates were cleared, we moved to the parlor for the gift exchange. The Christmas tree was a towering masterpiece decorated with vintage glass ornaments that cost more than my monthly rent. The air smelled of pine and expensive cognac. I sat on the very edge of the ottoman, clutching a small, simply wrapped package in my lap. My heart was pounding against my ribs. This was my peace offering. This was the moment I hoped would change everything. I had spent the last 4 months working on this gift. Every night after my double shift at the factory ended at 2 in the morning, I would sit in my cold apartment and knit. I did not use cheap wool from the craft store. I had saved up to buy pure imported cashmere yarn. It was charcoal gray, soft as a cloud, and cost me $300. My hands, already aching from assembling machinery all day, would cramp as I wove complex cable patterns into the fabric. Every stitch was a silent prayer. I wanted to show Grandma Lucille that even though I worked with my hands, those hands could create something beautiful, something worthy of her. It was finally my turn. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked over to her velvet armchair. "Merry Christmas, Grandma," I said softly, placing the soft bundle in her lap. "I made this for you." She looked at the package with the same enthusiasm one might look at a parking ticket. She peeled back the paper slowly. When the cashmere scarf fell out, she did not stroke it. She did not marvel at the softness. She picked it up with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. "Oh," she said, her voice flat. "A scarf. It is very dark. It looks like soot. Did you knit this yourself?" "Yes, ma'am," I said, smiling hopefully. "It is pure cashmere." She dropped it onto the side table next to a half-empty boat of gravy. It looks a bit rustic for my taste. But thank you, Ebony. I suppose it kept your hands busy." Then it was Dante's turn. He swaggered to the center of the room, holding nothing but a small white envelope. He cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention. "Grandma," he announced, his voice booming. "I didn't want to get you a material object. You have everything. A woman of your stature deserves the world. So I bought you an experience. This envelope contains a reservation for a virtual reality tour of the Swiss Alps. The headset is currently on back order because it is so exclusive, but once it arrives, you will travel without leaving your chair." The room gasped. Grandma Lucille clasped her hands to her chest, her eyes sparkling with tears. "Oh, Dante," she cried out. "The Swiss Alps. You are a visionary. You always know how to expand my horizons. This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." She reached out to hug him, ignoring the fact that the envelope was likely empty and the headset would never arrive. In her excitement, her elbow knocked into the gravy boat on the side table. The thick brown liquid spilled out, pooling rapidly toward the edge of the antique mahogany table. "Oh no, my table!" Grandma shrieked. Without thinking, without a second of hesitation, she grabbed the nearest piece of fabric to stop the spill. She grabbed my cashmere scarf. My breath caught in my throat. I watched in slow motion as she bunched up the $300 yarn, the result of hundreds of hours of my labor, and scrubbed it into the greasy brown mess. She wiped the table vigorously, matting the delicate fibers with beef fat and salt. Grandma, no! I gasped, stepping forward. That is cashmere. She didn't stop until the table was dry. Then she looked at the sodden, ruined ball of gray wool in her hand with disgust. She tossed it at my feet. The wet slap of the fabric hitting the floor echoed in the silent room. Well, she sniffed, wiping her hands on a napkin. At least it is absorbent. Finally, a useful gift from you, Ebony. You can take that wet rag to the laundry on your way out. It is ruining the aesthetic of my Christmas tree. Courtney covered her mouth to hide a giggle. Dante patted Grandma on the back, telling her she saved the table beautifully. I stood there looking down at the dark stains spreading across the floor, and I realized something. To them, my love was nothing more than a rag to clean up their mess. That was the moment my heart finally turned to stone. Christmas morning broke over Atlanta with a deceptive calm. The sky was a piercing blue, the kind that makes the frost on the windows glitter like diamond dust. In my small, drafty apartment, I was awake before the sun. Despite the humiliation of the previous night, despite the way Grandma Lucille had treated my cashmere scarf like a dirty rag, a foolish part of me still wanted to try. I wanted to believe that Christmas Day would be different. It was the day of miracles, after all. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, scrubbing my hands with a pumice stone for the third time. I scrubbed until my skin was raw and pink, desperate to remove even the faintest trace of machine oil. I wanted to be clean. I wanted to be perfect. I had laid out my outfit on the bed. It was a navy blue dress I had bought on clearance at Macy's. It wasn't designer, and it certainly wasn't bespoke, but it was elegant. I had spent an hour ironing every pleat, making sure it was crisp. I imagined walking into the dining room smelling of soap and vanilla, and finally seeing a smile on my grandmother's face. I imagined Dante treating me like a sister instead of a servant. I was 24 years old, a brilliant engineer who could dismantle a combustion engine with her eyes closed, yet I was reduced to a little girl begging for a seat at the table. I was just reaching for my earrings when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a sharp, aggressive vibration against the wood. Then another buzz. Then a cascade of notifications. I picked it up. It was the family group chat pompously named the Lucille Dynasty. My heart hammered against my ribs. Maybe it was a Merry Christmas message. Maybe it was an apology. I unlocked the screen and the words burnt into my retinas. The message was from Grandma Lucille. Urgent announcement regarding tonight's festivities, it read. We have received confirmation that Senator Williams and his wife will be joining us for the holiday roast. This is a high-profile networking opportunity for the family. Therefore, for the sake of our public image, attendance at the formal dinner is now restricted. I scrolled down, my breath hitching in my throat. The message continued. This dinner is for successful grandchildren only, those with respectable, clean professions, doctors, financiers, and lawyers. We cannot have the aroma of the factory floor mixing with the senator's cologne. Ebony, I think it is best you stay home this year. We will send you a plate of leftovers tomorrow. Do not come. I stared at the phone, my hand trembling so hard I almost dropped it. It wasn't just a rejection. It was an erasure. But what came next hurt more than the words themselves. Dante had reacted to the message with a heart emoji. My cousin Marcus sent a laughing face, and Courtney, my sweet sister-in-law, had typed out a reply. Great idea, Grandma. We want the senator to be comfortable. Maybe Ebony can pick up a shift at the factory instead. LOL. The LOL at the end felt like a physical slap. They were all online. They were all reading it. And not a single person defended me. Not my mother, not my aunts. They were all silent accomplices to my exile. I looked at the navy blue dress on my bed. It looked pathetic now. I looked at my scrubbed hands. They would never be clean enough for them. The hope that had fueled me just minutes ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard lump in my chest. I was not family to them. I was a stain they were trying to bleach out. And with that text message, they had finally succeeded. I stared at the phone screen until the backlight faded to black. The laughter of my siblings in the group chat echoed in my mind, but strangely the tears did not come. For 24 years, I had cried rivers for them. I had cried when they forgot my birthday. I had cried when they mocked my grades. But tonight, the well was dry. Something inside me had snapped. It was not a loud break like a bone fracturing. It was a quiet disconnect like a power cord being pulled from a wall socket. The hum of anxiety that had defined my existence suddenly went silent. I walked to the bathroom mirror. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on my face. I took a rough towel and wiped the streak of machine oil from my cheek. I scrubbed hard. I scrubbed until the skin was raw and red. But for the first time, I was not trying to clean myself for them. I was wiping them away from me. I looked at my reflection. The girl who begged for a seat at the table was gone. The woman staring back was cold, empty, and dangerous. I returned to my bedroom and pulled my battered suitcase from under the bed. I did not pack my nice clothes. I did not pack the dress I had ironed for the dinner. I threw in my work boots, my heavy denim jackets, and my technical manuals. I walked over to the desk where my blueprints were spread out. The schematics for the Vulcan robotic arm. My family saw grease and dirt. I saw the future of industrial automation. I rolled up the papers carefully, treating them with the reverence they deserved. These papers were my real family now. They did not judge. They simply worked if I built them right. I picked up my phone one last time. The notification light was blinking. Grandma had sent a follow-up text. Make sure you send your rent contribution for next month before you disappear to wherever you go. I did not reply. I did not type out an angry manifesto. I simply opened the group chat settings. I hovered my finger over the red text that said, "Leave conversation." I pressed it. The chat vanished. Then I went to my contacts. Grandma Lucille. Block. Dante. Block. Mom. Block. Courtney. Block. With every tap, I felt a physical weight lift off my shoulders. It was a release like dropping a heavy stone I had been carrying uphill my entire life. I walked out into the biting cold. The snow was falling harder now, covering the ugly concrete of the parking lot in a blanket of pure white. My old sedan groaned as I turned the key, but it started. The engine roared to life, a rough coughing sound that matched my mood. I did not look back at the apartment building. I did not look in the direction of Grandma's mansion on the hill. I shifted into gear and drove straight into the heart of the snowstorm. The road ahead was dark and slippery, but for the first time in my life, it was mine. I was not Ebony the disappointment anymore. I was a ghost, and ghosts have nothing left to lose. I drove until the city lights of Atlanta faded in my rearview mirror, disappearing into the white void, just like I was about to disappear from their lives. 5 years is a long time in the life of a lie. Eventually, the paint starts to peel and the wood underneath begins to rot. That is exactly what was happening to the Jenkins estate. The white colonial mansion that had once intimidated the entire neighborhood now looked like a fading beauty queen who had fallen on hard times. The manicured hedges were overgrown, choking the windows with wild ivy. The roof was missing shingles, like gaps in a smile. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of dust and old secrets. Dante was pacing back and forth in the living room, wearing a silk robe that had seen better days. He was screaming into his latest iPhone, his face slick with sweat. "Listen to me, you bottom feeder!" he shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "I do not care what the contract says. My assets are currently tied up in cryptocurrency. The market is just experiencing a temporary correction. You will get your money when I decide to liquidate. If you call this house one more time, I will sue you for harassment. Do you know who I am? I am a Jenkins." He slammed the phone down on the antique side table, breathing heavily. The creditor on the other end did not care about his last name. He only cared about the $50,000 Dante had borrowed to invest in a coin that had crashed to zero overnight. Grandma Lucille shuffled into the room. She looked smaller than I remembered, her posture slightly stooped, but her eyes were still sharp and critical. She was carrying a silver tea tray, but the silver was tarnished and the china cup had a visible chip in the rim. "Dante, stop shouting," she snapped, pouring herself lukewarm tea. The neighbors will hear you. We have a reputation to uphold. Mrs. Henderson next door was already asking why the pool service has not come in a month. Let them ask, Dante muttered, collapsing onto the sofa. The pool is green because the pump is broken, Grandma, and we cannot fix it because I am having a liquidity issue. Liquidity issue, she scoffed. You sound just like your father before he drank himself to death. We need cash, Dante. The property taxes are due in 2 weeks. If we do not pay, the county will put a lien on the house. Imagine the humiliation. Dante ran a hand through his thinning hair. I am working on it. I just need one big score, one deal to turn it all around. Suddenly, the heavy landline phone in the hallway began to ring. It was a shrill, demanding sound that made both of them jump. Dante stared at it like it was a bomb. If that is the bank, tell them I am in Paris, he hissed. Lucille sighed and picked up the receiver. Hello, the Jenkins residence. Her expression changed instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a greedy intensity. She waved her hand frantically at Dante to come closer. Oh, Mr. Wilson. Yes, of course. We were expecting your call. I see. Passed away peacefully in his sleep. Well, he was very old. Yes. The will. Tuesday. We will be there. She hung up the phone slowly, a strange smile spreading across her face. Who was it? Dante asked. It was your grandfather Theodore's lawyer, she whispered. The old man finally died. The reading of the will is on Tuesday. Dante jumped up, his financial panic forgotten. Grandpa Theodore. The miser who owned all that land in the county. I thought he cut us off years ago. He did, Lucille said, her eyes gleaming. But he never updated his paperwork. He was too stubborn. That means the estate goes to his direct descendants. To us. Dante let out a bark of laughter. We are saved. We are going to be rich again. This is it, Grandma. This is the bailout. Lucille took a sip of her tea, ignoring the chip in the cup. Just make sure you wear your best suit, Dante. We need to look like we do not need the money. We need to look like we deserve it, and let us pray that ungrateful sister of yours does not show up to ruin everything. Although knowing Ebony, she is probably rotting in a trailer park somewhere, completely unaware that her luck was about to run out for good. The cemetery was draped in a suffocating layer of gray fog that Tuesday morning. It was fitting weather for the burial of the only man in the Jenkins family who had ever possessed a spine. I watched from a distance as the black hearse pulled up to the family plot. Grandma Lucille stood at the front of the gathering, looking like a tragic widow from a Victorian play. She wore a black veil that was far too dramatic for a woman who had spent the last decade complaining about her husband's snoring. Next to her stood Dante and Courtney. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the cracks in their facade. Dante's suit was ill-fitting, likely because he had lost weight from the stress of his gambling debts, and Courtney's designer handbag was a season old, which for her was practically a declaration of bankruptcy. They were waiting for a savior, but they did not know the savior was coming in a tank. I turned the corner of the cemetery drive and let the engine speak for me. The deep, guttural roar of the twin-turbo 5.8 shattered the respectful silence of the graveyard. My matte black Ford F-150 Raptor R crested the hill like a beast emerging from the mist. It was not a polite vehicle. It sat high on 37-inch all-terrain tires with a suspension system designed to survive the apocalypse. The exhaust note was a low, aggressive growl that vibrated in your chest. I pulled up right behind Dante's leased Mercedes, which looked like a toy car next to my truck. Through the tinted windshield, I saw the immediate reaction. Courtney recoiled, as if the truck had physically offended her. She leaned into Dante, her face twisted in a sneer that I knew all too well. "Oh God, look at that monstrosity," she whispered loud enough for the wind to carry her voice. 5 years later, and she is still driving a work truck. It is absolutely tragical. I bet she has a ladder and a bucket of paint in the bed. She probably came straight from a construction site. Dante adjusted his tie, looking at my truck with disdain. It is embarrassed, really. We are here to mourn a great man and she shows up in something that belongs on a farm. I told you she would never amount to anything more than a laborer. I sat inside the cabin for a moment, gripping the Alcantara-wrapped steering wheel. They saw a dirty pickup truck. They saw manual labor. They saw poverty. What they were too ignorant to realize was that this truck cost $110,000. It had more computing power under the hood than Dante's entire failed crypto mining rig. It was a limited edition engineering marvel, capable of outrunning a sports car on dirt. But to the Jenkins family, if it had a truck bed, it meant you were the help. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I wasn't wearing pearls. I wasn't wearing silk. I was wearing the armor of success that I had built with my own 2 hands. I took a deep breath and killed the engine. The beast went silent. They thought they were looking at a failure. They had no idea they were looking at the person who was about to buy the ground out from under their feet. I opened the heavy door and stepped out into the mud, ready to face the ghosts of my past. I opened the heavy driver's side door of my truck and stepped out into the damp, heavy air of the cemetery. My boots sank slightly into the wet grass. To the untrained eye, they looked like standard-issue work boots caked in mud from a construction site. In reality, they were limited edition designer footwear that I had picked up in Milan last month during Fashion Week. I adjusted my dark sunglasses and walked toward the gathering. I was wearing a pair of black oversized cargo pants and a fitted black t-shirt. It was a look that screamed high fashion in New York or Los Angeles. It was utilitarian chic, and the pants alone cost more than the casket my grandfather was lying in. But here, in the suburbs of Atlanta, to my family, I just looked like I had forgotten to change after a shift at the factory. I could feel their eyes on me. It was a physical weight. The whispers started immediately rippling through the crowd of black umbrellas like a wave. I kept my head high, walking straight toward the front row where Grandma Lucille stood. She looked older. The lines around her mouth were deeper etched by years of bitterness and financial worry. She was clutching a lace handkerchief, dabbing at dry eyes. When she saw me approaching, she did not open her arms. She did not smile. She stiffened. Her spine went rigid as if she were bracing for an attack. I stopped 3 feet away from her. "Hello, Grandma," I said, my voice steady. She did not greet me. She did not ask how I had been for the last 5 years. She slowly lowered her handkerchief and looked me up and down. Her gaze lingered on my cargo pants with open disdain. "Ebony," she said, her voice low and cold like a draft from an open window. "I suppose I should be surprised you even showed up, though I see you could not be bothered to dress for the occasion." "I respected Grandpa," I said, ignoring the jab. "I wanted to pay my respects." "Respect," she scoffed. "You show respect by wearing a dress, Ebony. You show respect by looking like a lady. You look like you just crawled out from under a car." She stepped closer, closing the gap between us so she could hiss her next words without the pastor hearing. "Do not think you can just waltz back in here and sit with the family," she whispered. "You made your choice when you left. Now do me a favor. Go stand over there, behind that large oak tree. I do not want the neighbors seeing you and thinking we cannot afford to buy you decent clothes. You are an eyesore, Ebony, just like that truck of yours." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fraying hem of her dress. I saw the fear behind her arrogance. She was terrified of losing status, and here I was standing in a $3,000 outfit that she was too ignorant to recognize. "I will stand in the back, Grandma," I said quietly, "but I am not hiding." I turned and walked away. I could feel her glare burning into my back. She thought she was banishing me to the shadows. She did not realize that I owned the shadows now, and soon I would own everything else too. The air inside the St. Jude Baptist Church was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of stale incense, white lilies, and the sweat of people pretending to be righteous. I walked down the center aisle. My heavy boots echoed on the hardwood floor, creating a rhythm that cut through the soft organ music. I could feel the gaze of the entire congregation burning into my back. They were whispering about my clothes, my hair, and my audacity to show up after 5 years of silence. I kept my eyes fixed on the mahogany casket at the altar. Grandfather Theodore was the only person in this room who had ever looked at me with anything other than disappointment. I reached the front pew, the padded velvet bench where the immediate family always sat. My mother was there clutching a tissue. My aunts and uncles were lined up like crows on a wire. I moved to take my rightful place next to my mother, hoping that grief might have softened her heart just a little. But before I could sit, a hand shot out and blocked my path. It was Dante. He stood up blocking the entrance to the pew with his body. He smoothed the lapels of his cheap suit and looked down at me with a sneer that twisted his face. "Excuse me," he said loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "Where do you think you are going?" "I am sitting with my family." "Dante," I whispered, keeping my voice low out of respect for the dead. "I am here to bury our grandfather." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that grated on my nerves. "No, Ebony. You are confused. This row is for the core family, the people who were actually here, the people who matter. You forfeited your seat when you ran away to play mechanic. You are what we call a distant relative now." My mother sat just a few feet away. She heard every word. She did not look up. She did not defend me. She was busy adjusting her black veil, pretending I did not exist. Dante pointed a manicured finger toward the very back of the sanctuary, into the shadows under the choir loft. "See that folding metal chair next to the restroom door?" he said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "The one behind the janitor's closet. That is your seat. We saved it specifically for you, so you would not contaminate the aesthetic of the funeral procession. Go sit with the strangers, Ebony. You are not one of us anymore." I felt the blood rush to my face. The humiliation was sharp and hot. I could have made a scene. I could have told everyone right there that I had secretly paid for the casket they were crying over. I could have told them I paid for the flower arrangements that Dante was currently taking credit for. But I did not. I simply nodded. "Understood," I said. I turned around and walked the entire length of the aisle back the way I came. I sat on the cold metal chair next to the bathroom. From back here, I had a perfect view of their stiff backs and their fake grief. They thought they were punishing me by putting me in the cheap seats. They did not realize that by pushing me away, they were giving me the best vantage point to watch their house of cards come tumbling down. The air in the back of the church smelled of floor wax and stale grief. I could not sit on that cold metal chair next to the janitor's closet for another second. My phone had been vibrating against my hip for the last 10 minutes. It was a persistent, urgent rhythm that I knew meant trouble at the headquarters. I glanced at my mother in the front row. She was still weeping into a handkerchief, completely oblivious to the fact that her daughter was sitting by the toilets. I stood up silently and slipped out through the side door into the narrow hallway behind the choir loft. It was quiet here. The only sound was the muffled drone of the organ from the sanctuary. I pulled my phone from the pocket of my cargo pants and accepted the call. It was David, my vice president of operations. "Talk to me," I said, my voice dropping instantly into the command tone I used in the boardroom. David was frantic. He told me the Fremont plant was demanding the new shipment of robotic actuators early. They were threatening penalties. I rubbed my temples, looking at a cracked stained glass window. "Listen to me, David," I said, keeping my voice low but hard as steel. "I do not care what their timeline is. The calibration is not finished. If we ship early, we risk a 0.2% failure rate. I will not put my name on that. Cancel the Tesla order. Yes, you heard me. Pull the shipment. Tell them we are reallocating those units to the Atlanta project. I want all resources focused on the new facility here. We are closing on the land deal this week." I ended the call and let out a long breath. Canceling a contract worth $12 million was a risk, but I did not build Vulcan Robotics by being a pushover. I turned around to go back inside, and my heart stopped. Dante was leaning against the wall just 3 feet away. He was holding a plastic cup of lukewarm funeral punch, and a smirk was plastered across his face, like a bumper sticker. He had heard me. He had heard the word Tesla. He had heard me talking about orders and shipments. Well, 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 he said, stepping into my personal space. He smelled of cheap cologne and arrogance. So that is the big secret. That is where you disappeared to. I tightened my grip on my phone. What do you want, Dante? He chuckled, shaking his head with mock pity. I heard you on the phone, Ebony. Cancel the Tesla order. Pull the shipment. It all makes sense now. The truck, the dirty clothes, the rough hands. You are a delivery driver. I stared at him, blinking. He thought I was a courier. He thought I was driving parts across the country for Elon Musk. He took a sip of his punch, looking pleased with his deduction. It is nothing to be ashamed of, I suppose. Someone has to drive the trucks. Someone has to haul the heavy boxes so the real innovators can change the world. I guess you are essentially a glorified mailman for Tesla. That is why you are in Atlanta, right? You have a delivery route here. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. It was hysterical. He heard me cancel a multi-million-dollar deal, and his brain was so warped by prejudice that he interpreted it as me refusing to drive a truck. I looked at his smug face, his cheap suit, his absolute confidence in his own superiority. I could have crushed him right then. I could have shown him my bank account. I could have told him that I do not work for Tesla, I supply them. But I didn't. I needed him to sign those papers. I needed him to underestimate me. You got me, Dante, I said, forcing my voice to sound defeated. It is a living. Long hours on the road. Heavy lifting. It pays the bills. He patted my shoulder, wiping his hand on his pants afterward as if I were contagious. Well, at least you have a job. Just try not to block the driveway with that monstrosity of a truck when we go to the reception. Some of us have reputations to maintain. And Ebony, maybe if you work extra shifts, you can afford a dress that doesn't look like a trash bag. He walked away whistling a little tune, convinced he had just uncovered my shameful secret. I watched him go, a smile finally touching my lips. He thought I was the help. He had no idea he had just insulted the woman who was holding the axe above his neck. And when I finally let it drop, he wouldn't even see it coming. I was leaning against the matte black fender of my truck, checking emails on my phone, when I smelled her perfume. It was a cloying floral scent that tried too hard to mask the smell of desperation. I didn't need to look up to know that Courtney was standing there. I could practically feel her judgment radiating toward me like heat from a pavement. "Ebony, honey," she said, her voice dripping with that sticky, sweet southern charm that usually precedes an insult. I slid my phone into my pocket and crossed my arms. "Hello, Courtney," she sighed dramatically, adjusting the strap of her handbag. She looked at my truck, then at my boots, then back at my face. Her expression was a masterclass in fake pity. "You know, Dante and I were just talking about you." She began tilting her head. "It really breaks our hearts to see you like this. Struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. I know you try to put on a brave face, but we can tell. The clothes, the vehicle. It is obviously a hard life." I kept my face perfectly neutral. I was wearing a $300 t-shirt, but I knew better than to correct her. "What do you want, Courtney?" She stepped closer, lowering her voice as if she were offering me illegal contraband. "We want to help," she whispered. "We know you probably have trouble finding consistent work with your background. And honestly, our landscaping situation is a disaster. Our gardener quit last week. He had the audacity to ask for a raise. Can you believe it? People just do not want to work anymore." She gestured vaguely toward the sprawling, overgrown estate behind her. "Anyway, the weeds are getting out of control, and the homeowners association is threatening to fine us. Since you already have this big work truck, I assume you have equipment. Lawn mowers, weed whackers, that sort of thing." I stared at her. She was asking the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar robotics company to cut her grass. "I have tools," I said simply. "Perfect." She clapped her hands together. "Look, I want to give this job to family. I would rather the money go to you than some stranger. I can offer you $15 an hour. Cash. That way you do not have to worry about reporting it to the IRS. I know how tricky taxes can be for people in your bracket. $15 an hour. It was less than minimum wage in some states. It was an insult wrapped in a favor. She was looking at me with expecting eyes, waiting for me to be grateful, waiting for me to thank her for the crumbs falling from her table. A normal person would have thrown a drink in her face. But I saw an opportunity. I needed access to the property. I needed to survey the land for the factory expansion, and I needed to do it without them knowing. If I walked around with surveying equipment as a guest, they would be suspicious. But if I was the hired help, they would ignore me completely. I looked her dead in the eye and forced a tight smile. $15 an hour, I repeated. That sounds very generous of you, Courtney. Thank you. I could really use the cash. She beamed, looking visibly relieved that her charity case had accepted his place. Oh, good, she said, patting my arm. I knew you would be sensible. You can start tomorrow morning. And Ebony, please try to park this truck round the back. We might have guests, and I do not want them to think we are doing major construction. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the pavement. She thought she had just hired a cheap laborer. She had no idea she had just given the wolf the keys to the hen house. I watched her go, calculating exactly how much that $15 an hour was going to cost her in the end. I watched Courtney disappear into the house, feeling the weight of the $15 offer settle in my stomach like a stone. It was insulting, but it was also a key. With that verbal agreement, I now had legitimate access to every inch of the property. I could map the terrain, check the soil stability, and plan the foundation for the new research center without anyone asking questions. I was about to climb into my truck when my smartwatch vibrated against my wrist. It was a long, urgent pulse. I looked down and saw a red skull icon flashing on the screen. My heart rate spiked. It was a Level 4 security breach attempt at the main server farm in California. Someone was trying to brute force the encryption on our new neural network. I did not have time to drive back to my hotel. I did not even have time to sit in the cab. I reached into the back seat and grabbed my custom-built laptop. To the untrained eye, it looked like a bulky, rugged computer used by construction foremen. In reality, it was a military-grade workstation with enough processing power to launch a shuttle. I slammed the laptop down on the matte black hood of my truck. The engine was still warm, radiating heat through the metal, fighting against the chill of the morning air. I flipped the screen open, and my fingers flew across the keyboard. I did not need a mouse. I worked entirely in the terminal command lines cascading down the screen like green rain. I was building a digital firewall in real time, rerouting the traffic through our decoy servers in Iceland. My eyes were locked on the code, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Hey. The voice broke my concentration for a fraction of a second. I didn't look up. I kept typing, executing a countertrace to identify the hacker's IP address. I said, "Hey, Ebony." I finally glanced up without stopping my hands. Dante was standing on the porch steps holding a half-eaten bagel. He was looking at me with a mixture of annoyance and amusement. He gestured vaguely at my laptop with his free hand. "We just gave you a job and you are already goofing off. What are you doing? Playing World of Warcraft? Or are you updating your status on social media to tell everyone you finally found employment?" I hit the enter key, sending the final packet of defensive code. On my screen, the red skull turned green. Threat neutralized. I exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline recede. "I am just checking some emails, Dante," I said, closing the laptop with a snap. He laughed, shaking his head as he walked down the steps toward his leased Mercedes. "Emails, right. Like anyone sends emails to a laborer. You are probably playing solitaire." "You know that is your problem, Ebony. You are always distracted by toys. You have no focus, no drive. That is why you are 40 years old and still cutting grass for spare change while I am managing complex financial portfolios." He unlocked his car door and looked back at me one last time. "Try to put the games away when you start working tomorrow. We are paying you for your labor, not for your high score." He drove off, leaving me standing in the driveway with a smirk on my face. He saw a slacker playing video games on a truck hood. He had no idea that in the last 2 minutes the girl playing solitaire had just saved a $2 billion asset and identified a cyber attack originating from a rival tech firm in Shanghai. I patted the hood of my truck. Let him think I am playing games. When the game is over, I will be the only one left standing. The lawyer, Mr. Wilson, sat at the head of the dining table looking like he would rather be anywhere else. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at the paperwork that contained the final wishes of my grandfather Theodore. Grandma Lucille was gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white with anticipation. Dante was leaning forward, licking his lips as if he were about to be served a 5-course meal. I sat in the back on a folding chair near the kitchen door because even in legal proceedings I was still considered the help. To my wife Lucille, I leave the family estate and the remaining liquid assets, Mr. Wilson read in a monotone voice. Grandma let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived because the liquid assets barely covered the outstanding property taxes. Then came the part about the land. To my grandchildren Dante and Ebony, I leave the 40-acre plot of undeveloped land behind the old ridge to be divided equally. Dante slammed his hand on the table. The ridge, he shouted. That is just a swamp. It is a useless pile of mud and weeds. Grandpa must have been senile. Why didn't he sell that garbage years ago? Mr. Wilson closed the folder. That concludes the reading. The deeds will be transferred within the week. The room fell silent. Grandma Lucille looked furious that she hadn't received a massive payout. But I saw the gears turning in Dante's head. He pulled out his phone, probably checking the county tax assessment for the land. He frowned, seeing the low value. But then he looked at me, and his expression changed from disappointment to predatory cunning. He stood up and walked over to my folding chair. Ebony, he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. I am so sorry. Grandpa really stiffed us, didn't he? 40 acres of mud. You cannot build on it, you cannot farm it. It is basically a liability. You are going to have to pay property taxes on that dirt every year. I looked at him, keeping my face blank. I knew exactly what that land was. I had conducted a geological survey 3 months ago under a shell company. That swamp sat on top of a massive granite shelf, perfect for supporting heavy industrial machinery. It was the only plot of land in the county zoned for mixed industrial use. It was the heart of the new Vulcan robotics assembly plant project. Dante pulled a crumpled checkbook from his jacket pocket. Look, I do not want you to be burdened by this, he said, clicking a pen. You are already struggling. I can see that by the clothes you are wearing. I will do you a favor. I will buy your half of the land right now. I will take the tax burden off your shoulders. He scribbled something and tore the check out, holding it toward me. $500, he said, smiling like he was a saint. That should cover your gas money for a month. Maybe you can even buy a new pair of boots. Just sign your rights over to me and you can walk away free and clear. I looked at the check. $500. He was trying to buy a plot of land worth $4 million for the price of a used lawnmower. The greed was so thick I could taste it. He thought he was robbing a fool. He didn't know he was trying to hustle the person who had already drawn up the blueprints for the land he was standing on. I do not think so, Dante, I said quietly. I think I will keep my share. Grandpa left it to me for a reason. His smile vanished instantly, replaced by a flash of anger. Don't be stupid, Ebony. It is mud. Take the money and run. It is the best offer you will ever get. I stood up and walked past him, leaving the check fluttering in his hand. He called after me, telling me I was an idiot who didn't understand finance. I just kept walking. He wanted the land because he thought he could flip it for a few $1,000s. I wanted the land because I was going to build the future on it. And the best part was, he was going to watch me do it from the sidelines. The check for $500 lay on the Persian rug between us like a discarded gum wrapper. Dante was staring at me with his hand still extended, expecting me to dive for the money like a starving dog. To him, That piece of paper was charity. To me, it was proof of his absolute ignorance. He had no idea that beneath the muddy surface of that ridge lay a geological formation stable enough to anchor the heavy hydraulic presses of a next-generation robotics plant. He saw a swamp. I saw the foundation of an empire. I looked him in the eye and kept my voice soft and even. No, thank you, Dante. I think I will hold on to my inheritance. For a second, the room was silent. Then Dante laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. He looked at Grandma Lucille and then back at me as if I had just told a joke in a foreign language. "Excuse me," he said, stepping closer, his expensive Italian shoes crushing the edge of the rug. "I do not think you heard me correctly, Ebony. I am offering you cash, real spendable currency, for a patch of dirt that breeds mosquitoes. You are a laborer. $500 is what 2 weeks of wages for you." I did not blink. Actually, it is about 3 minutes of operating costs for my server farm, I thought, but I kept my mouth shut. Instead, I simply shrugged. "I like the land," I said. "It has sentimental value." That was the spark that lit the fuse. Dante did not just get angry, he exploded. His hand hit the mahogany table with a sound like a gunshot, making the crystal water pitcher jump. Sentimental value. He screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of red. "Are you insane? It is a mud pit. There is no sentiment in mud, Ebony. You are just being difficult. You are doing this to spite me because you are jealous. You know I have a vision. I have investors lined up who want to develop the adjacent properties. I need that ridge to rezone the entire sector." He was lying, of course. He didn't have investors. He had creditors. He needed my land as collateral to restructure his terrible loans. He was drowning, and he was trying to use me as a life raft. "I need that land," he hissed, leaning over me until I could smell the stale coffee on his breath. "Stop being selfish. What could you possibly do with 40 acres of industrial wasteland?" I looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. I leaned back in my folding chair, relaxing my shoulders while he vibrated with tension. "Well, Dante," I said slowly, dragging out every syllable, "I have been thinking about getting in touch with my roots. You guys always say I belong in the dirt, right? So I was thinking of starting a vegetable garden. Maybe some organic carrots. A few rows of corn. I hear the soil drainage back there is excellent for root vegetables." Dante's jaw literally dropped. He looked like he was having a stroke. "Vegetables," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "You are blocking a multi-million-dollar development project because you want to plant carrots." I nodded, solemn as a judge. "People have to eat, Dante. Inflation is terrible these days." He screamed. It was a primal sound of frustration. He kicked the chair next to him, sending it skidding across the floor. "You are a peasant," he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You are a small-minded, petty little peasant. Go ahead. Plant your stupid vegetables. Play in the mud. But when the tax bill comes and you cannot pay it, do not come crawling to me. I will not give you a dime." He stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the portraits on the walls rattled. Grandma Lucille glared at me with pure hatred before following him. I sat alone in the silence, looking at the check on the floor. I smiled. He thought I was planting carrots. He didn't know I was planting the seeds of his destruction. I received the invitation 2 days after the reading of the will. It was handwritten on heavy cream stationery, the kind Grandma Lucille used to reserve for thank you notes to the mayor. It simply said, "Come to dinner. Let us put the past behind us." I knew it was a trap. A tiger does not become a vegetarian overnight just because it is hungry. But I also knew that if I wanted to win this war, I had to sit at the table. So I drove my truck up the winding driveway once again. This time Grandma was waiting on the porch. She was not standing tall and proud like she was at the funeral. She was slumped over a cane I had never seen her use before. She looked frail. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She reached out a trembling hand to touch my cheek. "Ebony," she whispered, "you look so much like your father. I have missed you. We ate in the small breakfast nook, not the grand dining room. It was intimate, calculated. She had prepared a pot roast. It was dry and tasteless, but I swallowed every bite. She spent the first 20 minutes talking about her health. She mentioned her heart palpitations. She talked about how lonely the big house felt at night. She was painting a picture of a dying matriarch whose only wish was family unity. Then came the pivot. She set down her fork and looked at me with watery eyes. You know, Ebony, I lie awake at night worrying about you. I worry about you paying taxes on that swampland. I worry about you struggling with that heavy burden when you barely have enough to eat. And I worry about Dante. He is so fragile right now. He tries so hard to be the man of the house, but the stress is killing him. If you could just find it in your heart to help him, it would bring me such peace. She reached under the lace placemat and pulled out a crisp legal document. It was the transfer deed. She pushed it toward me along with a gold pen. Just sign it over, honey, she said, her voice quavering. Do it for me. Do it so I can die knowing my grandchildren are looking out for each other. Do not be stubborn like you were as a child. You always had such a hard heart, always holding grudges. Prove to me that you have changed. Prove to me that you love this family more than you love a patch of dirt. I stared at the pen. It was masterful manipulation. She was rewriting history, making me the villain for protecting my own property. She was calling me selfish for not letting them rob me. She was weaponizing her own mortality to guilt me into submission. I looked at her. I saw the desperate greed behind her teary eyes. I gently pushed the paper back across the table. I love you, Grandma, I said, lying through my teeth. And because I love you, I cannot let Dante take on more burden. I will keep the land. It is for his own good. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, and I saw the viper underneath before she covered it with a dramatic sob, burying her face in her napkin. The performance was over, and I had not bought a ticket. The steam rising from the large ceramic bowl in the center of the table smelled of cayenne pepper and butter. It also smelled like poison. My throat tightened just from the aroma. Grandma Lucille stood at the head of the table, holding a large serving spoon like a scepter. She beamed at Dante and Courtney as she ladled generous portions onto their plates. It was a Cajun seafood boil, shrimp, crawfish, crab legs, all boiled together in a spicy broth that was essentially a weaponized liquid for someone with my genetic makeup. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, staring at the empty plate in front of me. The silence stretched out, becoming heavy and awkward. Dante was already cracking open a crab leg, sucking the meat out with a noise that made my skin crawl. Courtney was peeling a shrimp, making a show of how delicious it was. Grandma Lucille finally looked at me, blinking with exaggerated innocence. Ebony, honey, why aren't you eating? I spent all afternoon cooking this. It is a traditional recipe. I looked at her calmly. Grandma, you know I am allergic to shellfish. Anaphylactic shock. You were the one who drove me to the emergency room when I was 7 after I ate that crab cake. She waved her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. Oh, honestly, Ebony, that was 20 years ago. I thought you would have grown out of that by now. Besides, I thought allergies were a rich person problem. You know, like gluten intolerance or sensitivity to sunlight. Since when did people who work in factories get to have delicate constitutions? She scooped a large spoonful of corn and potatoes onto my plate. The vegetables were glistening with the same red sauce that coated the shrimp. Just eat the vegetables, she said. They are just corn and potatoes. And pick around the shrimp if you want to be dramatic about it. I looked at the food. Cross-contamination. Even one drop of that broth could close my airway in 5 minutes. She knew it. This was not forgetfulness. This was a test of dominance. She was telling me that my life mattered less to her than her menu. I cannot eat this, Grandma, I said, pushing the plate away. The juice is on everything. Dante slammed a crab claw onto the table. Oh, for God's sake, Ebony, stop making everything about you. Grandma cooked a meal. Show some gratitude. You are acting like a princess when you are barely a pauper. Just eat the damn corn. I stood up slowly. I realized then that they would happily watch me choke to death if it meant they didn't have to admit they were wrong. I am not hungry, I said. Grandma Lucille narrowed her eyes, her voice dropping the sweet act. Well, if you are going to be difficult, there are some dry dinner rolls in the pantry. That is all we have. Maybe if you had signed the papers and helped Dante secure our finances, we could have afforded to order you a separate pizza. But beggars cannot be choosers, can they? She took a bite of shrimp, staring me down, daring me to complain. I looked at the lethal plate of food one last time. I walked to the pantry and grabbed a hard, stale roll. I sat back down and took a bite, my eyes locked on hers. She thought she was starving me into submission. She didn't know I had dealt with sharks in the boardroom, who were far more dangerous than the shrimp on her table. I would eat dry bread today so that tomorrow I could buy the restaurant. The midday sun over Atlanta was unforgiving. It beat down on the back of my neck as I unloaded the equipment from the bed of my Raptor. To anyone watching from the kitchen window, I looked exactly like what they expected. A desperate laborer sweating for $15 an hour, trying to scrape together enough cash to survive. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my glove and reached for the black case in the back seat. Inside sat the Spectre X4. To the untrained eye, it looked like a high-end hobby drone, something a teenager might play with in a park. In reality, it was a military-grade LiDAR scanner, capable of creating a three-dimensional topographical map accurate to the millimeter. I needed to confirm the granite density of the ridge before my architects finalized the foundation plans for the factory. If I walked around with tripods and lasers, they would ask questions. But a gardener playing with a toy drone on her break, that was invisible. I set the drone on the grass and powered it up. The rotors spun to life with a quiet, high-pitched hum. I guided it up toward the tree line, my eyes glued to the controller screen attached to my phone. On the display, the landscape wasn't green grass and weeds. It was a grid of heat signatures and density readings. I had just locked onto the coordinates of the ridge when I heard the patio door slide open. The sound of clinking glass and high-pitched laughter floated across the lawn. I did not look up, but I could see them in my peripheral vision. Courtney had stepped out onto the terrace. She was not alone. She was flanked by three women who looked like carbon copies of her. They all wore white tennis skirts, pastel polo shirts, and held glasses of iced tea that probably cost more than my hourly wage. "Oh, look, there she is," Courtney announced, her voice carrying across the lawn like a stage whisper. "Everyone, this is Ebony, Dante's sister, the one I told you about." The women leaned against the railing, peering at me over their designer sunglasses, like they were observing an exotic animal at the zoo. One of them, a brunette with a diamond tennis bracelet, gestured toward me with her glass. "Is that her?" she asked, loud enough for me to hear. "She looks so sturdy. I thought you said she was older." "She is my age," Courtney laughed, sipping her tea. "But a hard life ages you differently, Tiffany. We are just trying to help her get back on her feet. That is why I let her clear the brush. It gives her a sense of purpose. You know how these people need structure. Otherwise, they just drift." I gritted my teeth and adjusted the drone's altitude. On my screen, the data was flooding in. The bedrock was solid granite, perfect for heavy machinery. I was literally standing on a gold mine while they stood on the porch talking about me like I was a stray dog they had decided to feed. Courtney called out to me, waving her hand dismissively. "Ebony, honey, try not to make too much noise with that buzzer thing. We are trying to have a conversation, and make sure you get the weeds by the gazebo. That is where we are hosting the gala next month." I navigated the drone back for a landing. I wanted to laugh. She was worrying about weeds at a gazebo that I was going to bulldoze in 3 weeks. I gave her a thumbs up, playing the part of the obedient servant. "Enjoy your tea, Courtney," I thought, "because soon the only thing you will be drinking is the bitter taste of regret." The library was dark, illuminated only by the green glow of a banker's lamp. Dante sat at the heavy oak desk, his hands trembling as he held his phone. The message on the screen was simple and terrifying. It was a photo of him walking into the house taken from the bushes just an hour ago. The caption read, "You have 24 hours, Dante, or we break your legs." He threw the phone onto the leather blotter and ran his hands through his hair. He was sweating despite the air conditioning. He looked at the document in front of him. It was the quitclaim deed, transferring the 40 acres of ridgeland from Ebony Jenkins to Dante Jenkins. It was perfect. The legal jargon was sound. Mr. Wilson had drawn it up days ago, assuming Ebony would sign. The only thing missing was her signature on the bottom line. Dante opened the drawer and pulled out an old birthday card Ebony had given him 10 years ago, back when she still tried to buy his love. "Happy birthday, big brother, love, Ebony." He studied the loops of her handwriting. It was childish, simple. The handwriting of a girl who spent her life working with wrenches instead of pens. He scoffed aloud in the empty room. "She is so stupid," he whispered to himself. "She thinks she can hold this land hostage because she wants to plant a garden." A garden. "I am trying to save this family from ruin, and she is worried about carrots. She does not deserve that land. She does not even know what it is worth." He picked up a heavy fountain pen. It felt cold and authoritative in his hand. He hovered the nib over the signature line. His heart was hammering against his ribs, but his mind was strangely clear. This wasn't a crime, he told himself. This was a correction. He was the head of the household now. He knew what was best. Ebony was just an obstacle, a speed bump on the road to their salvation. Once he had the land, he could leverage it for a bridge loan, pay off the sharks, and then flip the property to the developers. By the time Ebony found out, he would be rich enough to buy her off with a new truck or whatever it was that factory workers wanted. He pressed the pen to the paper. He moved his hand slowly, mimicking the slant of her letters. Ebony Jenkins. The ink flowed dark and permanent. He lifted the pen and compared it to the card. It was a perfect match. A surge of adrenaline rushed through him, replacing the fear. He had done it. He leaned back in the chair, laughing softly. "You should have just taken the $500, Ebony," he said to the empty room. "Now you get nothing. You are going to wake up tomorrow with no land, no leverage, and no clue what happened. Because you are just a high school dropout, and I am a financial genius." He blew on the wet ink, drying the crime that would seal his fate. He folded the document and slid it into a manila envelope. He felt invincible. He had no idea that he had just signed his own arrest warrant. The boutique smelled of leather and orchids. It was the kind of silence you only find in places where a single handbag costs more than a mid-sized sedan. I walked into Tom Ford with a specific mission. I needed armor for the battle ahead, and I knew exactly what I wanted. A white silk tuxedo suit, sharp, immaculate, powerful. It was the complete opposite of the grease-stained coveralls my family thought I lived in. I was standing by the rack, running my hand over the lapel of a blazer that retailed for $4,000. The fabric was cool and smooth against my fingertips. I wasn't looking at the price tag. I didn't need to. "Ebony." The voice was shrill enough to crack the glass display cases. I froze. I didn't need to turn around to know it was Courtney. Of course they were here. Dante probably dragged them to the most expensive mall in Atlanta to maintain appearances, even though his credit cards were maxed out. I turned slowly. Courtney was standing there, clutching a purse that I knew was a knockoff. Dante and Grandma Lucille were hovering behind her, looking out of place among the quiet luxury. "What are you doing in here?" Courtney demanded, marching up to me. Her eyes darted around the store nervously, as if she expected security to throw us all out. "This isn't a hardware store, Ebony. They do not sell work boots here." "I am shopping, Courtney," I said, keeping my voice low. "Just like you." She let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Shopping? You? Please, do not embarrass us. You cannot afford a keychain in this place, let alone a suit." She reached out and physically snatched the white blazer from my hand. The movement was aggressive, almost violent. She held the jacket away from her body as if it were radioactive. Do not touch this, she hissed, examining the sleeve. Your hands are probably covered in oil. Do you have any idea how delicate this silk is? If you get one smudge of grease on this, you will have to pay for it, and we both know you do not have $4,000. Dante stepped forward, looking at the suit with hungry eyes. She is right, Ebony, he said, adjusting his cheap tie. This is for people with class, people with assets. Put it back before you ruin it. Honestly, I'm surprised they even let you in the door wearing those cargo pants. I looked at my hands. They were clean, manicured. I looked at Courtney, clutching the suit like it was the Holy Grail. She wanted it so bad she could taste it, but she couldn't buy it. I was just looking, I said, forcing myself to sound meek. I thought maybe… For the dinner, Courtney scoffed, cutting me off. For the dinner. You are parking cars, Ebony. You do not need a Tom Ford suit to park cars. You need a reflective vest. Now get out of here before the manager comes over. I do not want people knowing we are related to the loiterer. She shoved the jacket back onto the rack, smoothing it down with possessive strokes. I watched her caress the fabric she could never own. You are right, I said, backing away. It is too white. It would be a shame to ruin it. I walked out of the store, my head down. As I passed the display window, I saw Courtney whispering to Dante, pointing at the suit with longing. They thought they had put me in my place. They didn't know that 5 minutes later I would call the store manager personally and have that exact suit delivered to my hotel suite. And when I wore it, I wouldn't just look like $1,000,000, I would look like their worst nightmare. I walked away from the boutique with my heart pounding against my ribs, but I refused to leave the mall. I had other errands to run, and I would not let them chase me out of a public space. I was standing near the central fountain, checking the specifications for the new server racks on my phone, when a shrill scream cut through the ambient noise of the shopping center. It was the kind of scream that stops traffic. It was the sound of a woman who had never been told no in her life, facing a minor inconvenience. My wallet, my Louis Vuitton wallet, is gone. Someone stole it. I looked up. 50 yards away, outside the Tom Ford store, Courtney was frantically dumping the contents of her handbag onto a wooden bench. Lipsticks, receipts, and breath mints scattered everywhere. She was shaking. Dante and Grandma Lucille stood next to her, looking helpless. Then Courtney looked up. Her eyes scanned the crowd and locked onto me. The panic in her face instantly transformed into malicious triumph. She raised a manicured finger and pointed it straight at my chest like a loaded weapon. Her. It was her. She stole it. The accusation hung in the air for a second, before the crowd turned to look at me. I stood frozen. Courtney began marching toward me, her heels clicking furiously on the marble floor. You stole it! She screamed, causing shoppers to gasp. You were standing right next to me in the store. You bumped into me. I felt your hand go into my bag. Give it back, Ebony. I did not touch you, Courtney, I said, keeping my voice calm, despite the rage boiling in my blood. Check your car. You probably left it in the center console. Liar, she shrieked, getting right in my face. You have been a thief since you were a child. You steal loose change. You steal food. And now that you are broke and desperate, you are stealing my credit cards. Dante, do something. She has my wallet. Dante stepped forward, trying to look authoritative. Ebony, look, just give it back, he said loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. We know you are struggling. We know you are jealous of our lifestyle. But this is a felony. Just hand it over and we won't call the police. I am not jealous of your debt, Dante, I said, and I do not have her cheap wallet. 2 uniformed security guards came running over, their radios crackling. One was heavy-set, the other tall and thin. They looked at the scene. On one side, a hysterical crying white woman in a dress. On the other side, a black woman in cargo pants and heavy boots. The bias was immediate and obvious. Is there a problem here, ma'am? The heavy guard asked Courtney, ignoring me completely. She robbed me. Courtney sobbed, clinging to Dante's arm. That woman. She is my sister-in-law, unfortunately. She is a drug addict and a thief. She stole my wallet right out of my bag. It had $2,000 cash in it. The guard turned to me, his hand resting on his belt. "Mom, I need you to empty your pockets. Now." I stared at him. "You are joking. You are going to search me based on zero evidence because she is crying. I am not asking." The guard said, stepping closer. "I am telling you, empty your pockets or we will detain you until the police arrive." I looked around. Dozens of people were filming with their phones. This was the humiliation they wanted. They wanted to strip me of my dignity. I slowly reached into my cargo pockets. I pulled out my phone, my keys to the Raptor, and a single black metal card, my Centurion American Express. I held them out. "See," I said. No wallet, no cash. Courtney didn't miss a beat. She probably handed it off to someone she screamed, or she threw it in the trash can. "Check the trash cans. She is a criminal officer. You have to arrest her. She has been stealing from our family for years." The guard looked at me with suspicion. "Turn around and put your hands on the wall, ma'am. We need to do a pat-down." That was the moment the last thread of familial loyalty snapped. They were not just being mean. They were trying to get me incarcerated. I turned toward the wall, feeling the cold marble against my palms. Let them search. Let them create a spectacle. Because when the police arrived and realized who I actually was, this entire mall was going to become a courtroom. The security guard patted me down with unnecessary force, his hands moving roughly over the pockets of my cargo pants. I could hear the camera shutters clicking from the crowd of onlookers. To them, this was just entertainment. Another low-life criminal getting caught in high definition. My face was pressed against the cold marble wall of the shopping center, but I turned my head just enough to see my family. They were enjoying this. Courtney was dabbing at her dry eyes with a tissue, looking every bit the fragile victim. Grandma Lucille stood with her back straight, clutching her purse tightly, as if I might telekinetically steal her pension from across the room. But it was Dante who looked the most satisfied. He was bouncing on the balls of his feet, practically vibrating with excitement. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The proof that he was the success and I was the failure. "That is the police," he announced, pointing toward the entrance. "It is over, Ebony." I looked toward the glass doors. Sheriff Miller was walking through the crowd like a tank parting water. He was a mountain of a man with silver hair and a badge that caught the light. He wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 deputies. The mall's security guard, who was currently twisting my arm behind my back, straightened up instantly, trying to look professional for the real law enforcement. "Over here," Sheriff Dante called out, waving his hand. "We have the suspect detained. She is my sister, unfortunately. She has a history of theft. We caught her red-handed stealing my wife's wallet." Sheriff Miller stopped in front of us. He didn't look at Dante. He didn't look at Courtney, who let out a fresh wail of distress for his benefit. He looked at the security guard, and then he looked at me. His eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Release her," the sheriff said, his voice low and commanding. The security guard blinked, confused. "But sir, she is a suspect. The family claims—" "I said let her go. Now." The guard released my arm immediately. I rubbed my wrist and turned to face them. Dante stepped forward, his confusion turning into indignation. "Sheriff, you do not understand," Dante said, stepping into Miller's personal space. "This woman is a thief. You cannot just let her go because she is a woman. I demand you search her vehicle. The wallet is probably in her truck." Sheriff Miller slowly turned his head to look at Dante. The look was withering. "I know exactly who this woman is, son, and I know for a fact she did not steal a used Louis Vuitton wallet." He turned back to me and his hard expression melted into a warm, respectful smile. He reached out and shook my hand. "Ms. Jenkins, it is an honor to see you. I did not know you were in town. I wanted to personally thank you for the shipment of tactical body cameras that arrived at the precinct this morning. The department has been trying to get budget approval for those for 3 years. Your donation saved us." The silence that followed was absolute. Courtney stopped crying mid-sob, her mouth hanging open in an unflattering O shape. Grandma Lucille looked as if she had been slapped. Dante looked between me and the sheriff, his brain trying to process the information. Donation? Dante stammered. What donation? She cuts grass. She drives a beat-up truck. The sheriff laughed, a deep rumble that shook his chest. Cuts grass. Son, Ms. Jenkins is the CEO of Vulcan Robotics. She just outfitted my entire force with top-of-the-line tech. I smoothed down my shirt and looked at Dante. His face had drained of all color. Hello, Sheriff, I said calmly. I am glad the equipment arrived safely. I believe in transparency and justice. Speaking of which, perhaps we should check the security footage from the Tom Ford store. I have a feeling it will show that my hands never went near Courtney's bag. The sheriff nodded. We will absolutely pull that footage, Ms. Jenkins. And if anyone filed a false police report, well, that is a serious crime. I looked at Courtney. She was suddenly very pale, clutching her bag to her chest. Maybe I should check my car again, she squeaked. I might have dropped it. Go check Courtney, I said, my voice ice cold. And Dante, close your mouth. You look like you have seen a ghost. I turned and walked away, flanked by the sheriff, leaving my family standing in the middle of the mall, looking small, confused, and utterly defeated. They had called the law to destroy me. They didn't realize that in my world I didn't just follow the law, I funded it. The breaking news alert on the television cut through the tension in the living room like a knife. I was in the corner, silently polishing the silverware that Grandma Lucille had insisted I clean for her imaginary guests. On the screen, a news anchor with perfect teeth and a frantic expression was standing in front of a green screen map of our county. The headline screamed, Vulcan Robotics confirms $2 billion gigafactory in Atlanta. Dante, who had been sulking on the sofa about his legal troubles, suddenly sat bolt upright. He grabbed the remote and turned the volume up so high the windows rattled. The reporter continued. Sources confirm that the tech giant Vulcan Robotics has secretly acquired land rights for a massive assembly plant. This project is spearheaded by their reclusive and mysterious CEO, who has yet to make a public appearance in the city. Real estate experts predict property values in the surrounding sector will triple overnight. The room erupted. It was like watching a group of starving hyenas spot a wounded gazelle. Dante jumped to his feet, spilling his scotch all over the rug I had just vacuumed. Did you hear that? He screamed, pointing at the TV. Triple. They said triple. That means the ridge is not worth 4 million. It is worth 12, maybe 15. I am rich. We are rich. Grandma Lucille clapped her hands together, her eyes wide with a manic gleam. The Lord has provided, she cried out, looking at the ceiling. I knew our luck would turn. A $2 billion factory right in our backyard. We are going to be the most powerful family in Atlanta again. Courtney was already on her phone, scrolling through real estate listings. We need to sell immediately, Dante, she said, breathless. We need to cash out before they change their minds. No, Dante shouted, pacing the room like a caged tiger. We do not sell to just anyone. We sell to the top. We sell to the CEO. If this mystery man is coming to town, we need to get to him first. We need to wine him and dine him. Grandma Lucille nodded vigorously. You are right, Dante. We must host a dinner, a welcome gala. We will invite the CEO to our home. We will show him true Southern hospitality. Once he eats my pot roast and sees our lineage, he will pay whatever price we ask. I stood there holding a silver fork, watching them celebrate. It was the most delicious irony I had ever tasted. They were planning a feast for a king, not realizing the queen was standing right behind them holding a polishing cloth. They were fantasizing about millions of dollars based on a land deed that Dante had forged, and a property line that I already controlled. Dante turned to me, his face flushed with victory. You hear that, Ebony? He sneered. This is what business looks like. While you are playing with toy drones and cutting grass, I am about to close the deal of the century. You should be thanking me. When I sell that land, I might even buy you a new lawnmower. I lowered my head to hide the smile that was threatening to break through. That sounds like a big plan, Dante, I said softly. I hope this CEO is everything you imagine him to be. Oh, he will be, Dante said, adjusting his cuffs. Men of vision recognize each other. He is probably a genius, a titan of industry. He won't waste his time with peasants. I went back to polishing the silver. They were frantic with joy, building castles in the sky. They had no idea that the storm was already inside the house, and it was waiting for the perfect moment to blow the roof off. I was sitting in the temporary command center I had set up in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, a city I was currently reshaping with a billion-dollar investment. On the glass desk in front of me lay the dossier on Dante Jenkins. It was a thick file cataloging every bad loan, every gambling debt, and every fraudulent transaction he had made in the last 5 years. I was just reaching for my espresso when my personal cell phone buzzed. I looked at the caller ID. It was Dante. I let it ring twice, debating whether to ignore it, but I knew the game was nearing its end. I needed to hear his voice one last time before I destroyed him. I pressed answer and put it on speaker. "Ebony, are you there?" Dante shouted, his voice cracking with manic energy. "Pick up. I have life-changing news." "I am here, Dante," I said, leaning back in my leather chair. "What do you want?" He let out a breathy laugh. "You are not going to believe this. My strategy worked. The gala is on. The CEO of Vulcan Robotics, the man himself. He has accepted our invitation. He is coming to the house this Saturday night to sign the papers personally." I took a slow sip of my coffee. He thought the CEO was a man. Of course he did. In Dante World Power only wore a tie and spoke with a baritone voice. "That is impressive, Dante," I said, keeping my voice flat. "I am surprised he has time for a dinner party." Dante scoffed. "It is not just a dinner party, Ebony. It is a meeting of minds. Titans recognize titans. He knows that to build in this town he needs the Jenkins family blessing. But listen, I did not call to explain high-level business strategy to you. I have a job for you." I raised an eyebrow. "A job?" "Yes," he continued, speaking fast. "We have the caterers, we have the musicians, but we forgot one detail. Valet parking. We cannot have a billionaire walking from the driveway to the front door like a commoner. We need someone to park his car. And since you spend your life driving that monstrosity of a truck and working with machinery, I figured you are qualified." He paused, waiting for me to thank him. "You want me to park cars at your dinner party?" I asked. Dante sighed impatiently. "Do not make it sound like a chore. I am giving you a chance to be part of history. Plus, I will pay you $20 cash. And if the CEO is generous, maybe he will tip you. Just make sure you wear something clean. White shirt, black pants, and for God's sake hide that hair under a cap. We want you to look professional, invisible." I looked at the file on my desk. I looked at the white Tom Ford suit hanging in the closet behind me. He wanted me to be invisible. He wanted me to handle the CEO's car. "I will be there, Dante," I said. "I will make sure the CEO's arrival is unforgettable." "Good," he said. "Do not be late. And Ebony, do not try to talk to him. Just take the keys and park the car. Stay in your lane." He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the phone. $20. He offered the woman who owned the company $20 to park her own car. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the ants crawling on the street below. He told me to stay in my lane. He had no idea that I did not just own the lane. I owned the entire road. Saturday night was going to be spectacular. I held the phone against my ear, listening to the dead air where Dante's arrogance used to be. He was waiting for me to fight back. He was waiting for me to scream that I was not a servant, that I was a Jenkins, and I deserved a seat at the table. But I gave him exactly what he wanted. I gave him submission. "I will be there, Dante," I said, my voice smooth and devoid of any emotion. "I will wear the white shirt and black pants. I will stand by the front door. And I will make sure the CEO of Vulcan Robotics receives the welcome he deserves." "Excellent," he replied, and I could practically hear him smiling. "I knew you would see reason. Just make sure you do not embarrass us. Keep your head down, speak only when spoken to, and Ebony try to look presentable. I will do more than that, I said. In fact, since this is such a momentous occasion for the family, I am going to bring a gift for you. A little something to commemorate the signing of the deal. Dante scoffed. A gift. What are you going to give me, Ebony? A gift card to a hardware store. Keep your money. You need it more than I do. It is not something I bought, I said. It is something I prepared. It is a document that represents exactly what you have earned over the last 5 years. I think you will find it very illuminating. Fine, whatever, he said dismissively. Just do not be late. The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone and placed it face down on the polished glass surface of the conference table. I was not standing in a kitchen or a garage. I was sitting in the executive boardroom of the Vulcan satellite office 40 stories above the street. The air conditioning hummed with a quiet, expensive efficiency. I spun my leather chair around to face the man sitting at the far end of the table. Alan Sterling was the most expensive litigator in the state of Georgia. He wore a suit that made Dante leased outfits look like costumes. He had a thick file folder open in front of him. Did the forensic analysis come back, Alan? I asked. He nodded, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. It did, Ms. Jenkins. The handwriting expert confirmed it this morning. The signature on the quitclaim deed transferring the ridgeland to Dante Jenkins is a clumsy forgery. The pressure points on the pen strokes match the samples we pulled from your brother's canceled checks. It is not even a good attempt. He traced it from an old birthday card. I leaned back, looking at the ceiling. Dante was not just greedy. He was sloppy. He thought I was so insignificant that the law did not apply to crimes committed against me. Draft the complaint, I said. Felony fraud, forgery, identity theft, and grand larceny attempted. I want the full weight of the penal code dropped on his head. Alan pulled a gold pen from his pocket. I can file this electronically right now. The police can pick him up within the hour. No, I said, holding up a hand. Not yet. Saturday night. The gala starts at 7. The CEO is scheduled to arrive at 8. I want you to have the process server waiting in the kitchen. When I give the signal, I want those papers placed in his hand in front of every investor and socialite in Atlanta. Alan closed the folder with a satisfying thud. It will be a pleasure. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Dante wanted a valet. He wanted someone to park the cars and stay invisible. I would play my part perfectly. I would park his car, and then I would park his entire life in a federal prison cell. The trap was set, and he had just walked right into the center of it. The chandeliers in the grand foyer of the Jenkins estate were vibrating slightly. It was not from the wind, but from the nervous energy that seemed to pulse through the very foundation of the house. Grandma Lucille had outdone herself. She had turned the fading mansion into a palace of light and flowers. Every banister was wrapped in fresh garlands of white roses and gold ribbon. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. It was a beautiful lie. Every petal, every bottle of vintage champagne, and every note played by the hired string quartet was paid for with money they did not have. Dante had taken out a predatory high-interest loan just that morning using the forged land deed as collateral. He was currently standing in front of the hallway mirror, adjusting his bow tie with trembling hands. He looked like a man walking to the gallows, hoping that if he dressed well enough, the executioner might let him go. "Make sure the crystal is polished," Courtney screamed at a catering server. She was wearing a sequined gown that glittered under the lights, but her eyes were frantic. "We cannot have spots on the glasses. The CEO of Vulcan Robotics is coming. Do you understand who that is? One mistake, and you are fired." They were running around like actors on a stage, terrified that the curtain would fall and reveal the rotting wood behind the set. They were betting everything on this night. They believed that one signature from this mystery billionaire would wipe away 5 years of failure. 5 miles away, in the silence of the presidential suite at the Ritz-Carlton, the atmosphere was very different. There was no panic here. There was only the quiet hum of absolute power. I stood in the center of the dressing room, staring at my reflection. The woman looking back at me was not the mechanic who smelled of oil and metal. She was not the poor relation who cut grass for spare change. She was a titan. I reached out and touched the fabric of the suit hanging on the valet stand. It was the Tom Ford white silk tuxedo, the same one Courtney had snatched from my hands in the store. I had had it tailored to fit me within a millimeter of my life. I slipped the trousers on. They fell perfectly straight, sharp, and authoritative. Then the shirt crisp white cotton against my skin. Finally, the jacket. I slid my arms into the silk-lined sleeves. It was heavy, substantial. It felt less like clothing and more like armor. I buttoned the single button at the waist and looked in the mirror again. The wide peak lapels framed my face, emphasizing the strength of my jaw. The stark white fabric made my skin glow. I did not wear jewelry. I did not need diamonds to sparkle. The suit spoke for itself. It screamed wealth. It screamed control. It screamed that I was the one writing the checks. I picked up my phone. It was time. Dante was expecting a valet in a polo shirt. He was expecting a servant to park his guests' cars. Instead, he was about to open his front door to the owner of the company he was trying to impress. I checked my reflection one last time. The girl who begged for love was gone. The CEO was ready for business. I walked out of the suite, leaving the silence behind, ready to bring the storm to their front door. The heavy oak doors of the Jenkins estate were usually locked to people like me. For 20 years, I had been relegated to the service entrance, the kitchen door, or the mudroom where the staff left their boots. But tonight, I did not reach for the brass handle of the side door. I walked straight up the limestone steps to the main entrance. The double doors were ajar, allowing the sounds of a string quartet and the murmur of polite society to drift out into the night air. I adjusted the cuffs of my white silk blazer. It was time. I pushed the doors open wide and stepped across the threshold. The foyer was crowded with Atlanta's elite. Men in black tuxedos and women in jewel-toned gowns held flutes of champagne, pretending to enjoy the party. I stepped onto the white marble floor. The click of my heels was not loud, but it was distinct. It cut through the chatter like a gunshot. One by one, heads turned. The conversation died away in a ripple effect, starting from the door and spreading all the way to the grand staircase. I stood framed by the archway, illuminated by the massive crystal chandelier above. The white Tom Ford tuxedo seemed to catch every photon of light in the room, making me glow against the sea of black suits. I was not just wearing a suit, I was wearing a supernova. I saw the confusion ripple through the crowd. They recognized the face, but they could not reconcile it with the reality. They were looking for the mechanic, the girl in the dirty coveralls. Instead, they saw a woman who looked like she owned the building and everyone in it. I walked forward, not rushing, letting them absorb the image. People instinctively parted way from me like water retreating from the shore, giving me a wide berth. Then I saw Grandma Lucille. She was standing near the buffet table, holding a crystal glass. Her eyes went wide. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a wax statue. She set the glass down so hard it nearly shattered and rushed toward me. Her cane clattered against the marble as she moved faster than she had in years. She intercepted me near the fountain, her face twisted in a mask of sheer panic and fury. "Ebony, have you lost your mind?" she hissed, grabbing my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "What are you doing in here? The guests are staring. Get out! Get out right now!" She looked around frantically, terrified that the mysterious CEO would walk in and see her disgraced granddaughter standing in the foyer. "I told you to go to the parking lot," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You are supposed to be parking cars. Look at you. You are wearing a costume. You look ridiculous. If the VIP walks in and sees you here, he will think we are running a circus. Go to the back door immediately before you ruin everything we have worked for." I looked down at her hand on my white silk sleeve. I did not pull away. I simply looked at her with a gaze so cold it could have frozen the champagne in the glasses nearby. She was worried about the VIP seeing me. She was terrified of the CEO walking through the door. She was so blinded by her own prejudice that she still bad not realize the truth. The VIP was not coming through the door. The VIP was already standing in her hallway, and she was trying to send her to the parking lot. The silence in the room was brittle. My white Tom Ford suit was acting as a beacon, reflecting the chandelier light and blinding the guests to the reality of who I was. I could feel the admiration in the room, but I could also feel the hate. It radiated from the corner near the grand staircase where Courtney stood. She was trembling. It was not fear. It was a pure, unadulterated jealousy that had turned toxic. She looked at me standing there, looking like a queen in the house she had married into, and she could not stand it. She gripped the stem of her oversized wine glass so hard her knuckles turned white. It was filled to the brim with a heavy, dark Cabernet. I saw her move. She did not walk toward me, she stalked. She navigated through the crowd of investors and socialites, her eyes locked on the pristine white silk of my jacket. I knew exactly what she was going to do. I could calculate the trajectory of a falling satellite, so predicting the actions of a petty, insecure woman was elementary physics. But I did not move. I did not step aside. I let her come. I needed the room to see this. I needed them to see exactly who the Jenkins family really was. Courtney reached me. She feigned a stumble, catching her heel on the perfectly flat marble floor. It was a terrible performance. She lurched forward with a dramatic gasp, and her arms swung out in a wide, calculated arc. The wine left the glass. It flew through the air like a dark crimson ribbon. Time seemed to slow down. I watched the liquid splash against the lapel of my $4,000 jacket. It soaked into the white silk, instantly spreading like a gunshot wound blooming across my chest. The cold, wet sensation seeped through to my skin, but I did not flinch. I did not gasp. I stood perfectly still as the red drips fell from the hem of my jacket onto the white marble floor. The room gasped in unison. The music stopped. Every eye was glued to the disaster. Courtney straightened up. There was no remorse in her eyes, only a sick satisfaction. She pulled a cocktail napkin from a passing waiter and dabbed ineffectually at my chest, smearing the stain further, making it permanent. "Oh my goodness," she said, her voice loud and dripping with fake sweetness. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry, Ebony. I must have tripped over my own gown." She leaned in close, her face inches from mine, so only I could hear the venom in her whisper. "But honestly, honey, it is probably for the best. You look ridiculous. You can put a monkey in a silk suit, but at the end of the day, it is still just a monkey. Go clean yourself up. You look like the trash you are." She pulled back, flashing a bright, apologetic smile to the horrified crowd. "Just a little accident, everyone. The maid will clean it up. Please enjoy your drinks." I looked down at the ruined jacket. The stain was jagged and ugly. A normal person would have cried. A normal person would have run to the bathroom in shame. But I was not normal. I was Vulcan. I looked at Courtney, who was beaming with the pride of a schoolyard bully. She thought she had stripped me of my armor. She did not realize that by destroying the suit she had just given me the ultimate weapon. She had shown the world her true face, and in doing so, she had signed her own social death warrant. I brushed a droplet of wine from my lapel and smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. The suit was replaceable. Her reputation after tonight would not be. The silence following Courtney's act of vandalism did not last long. It was shattered by a sound that made the crystal glasses vibrate on the silver trays. First came the deep, guttural rumble of heavy engines approaching up the driveway. Then came the sirens. They were not the wailing sirens of an emergency, but the short, sharp chirps of a police escort clearing the way for someone of immense importance. Blue and red lights washed over the walls of the foyer, turning the white roses into strange alien shapes. The guests rushed to the floor-to-ceiling windows, their curiosity piquing. I did not need to look. I knew exactly what was coming up the drive. It was a motorcade. 5 black Cadillac Escalades with tinted windows moved in a tight tactical formation. They were flanked by a sheriff cruiser with its light bar flashing. The gravel of the driveway crunched under 20 massive tires as the convoy came to a halt right in front of the grand entrance. The headlights cut through the gloom, blindingly bright, sweeping across the foyer like searchlights seeking a target. It was a display of power usually reserved for presidents or visiting royalty. Dante practically leaped into the air. His face was flushed with a mixture of terror and ecstasy. He ran to the window, pressing his hands against the glass like a child watching a parade. "They are here," he screamed, his voice cracking. "Look at that! Look at the security! 5 cars! A police escort! I told you he was a titan. This is it. This is the moment everything changes." He spun around to face the room, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. "Places, everyone. Places. The CEO is arriving. I want the musicians playing immediately. Waiters, stand at attention. Do not look him in the eye unless he speaks to you." Then his gaze landed on me. He stopped dead. The manic joy on his face instantly curdled into horror. He looked at the white Tom Ford suit ruined by the dark red wine stains spreading across my chest. To him, I looked like a disaster. I looked like a walking crime scene that would offend the delicate sensibilities of his billionaire guest. "Ebony," he hissed, rushing over to me and grabbing my shoulder with a painful grip. "You cannot be here. Look at you. You are a mess. You look like you have been in a knife fight." He shoved me hard toward the swinging doors that led to the servants' quarters. "Get out!" he shouted over the rising volume of the string quartet. "Go to the kitchen. Hide in the pantry. I do not care where you go, just get out of sight. If the CEO walks in here and sees you looking like a piece of trash, he will turn around and leave. You are ruining the aesthetic, Ebony. Move!" I stumbled back slightly from his shove, but I caught my balance. I looked at the heavy oak doors, where the security detail was already stepping out of the vehicles. I looked at Dante, who was sweating through his cheap tuxedo, terrified that his illusion was about to break. "I will move, Dante," I said, my voice calm amidst the chaos. "But I am not going to the kitchen." He didn't hear me. He was too busy rushing to the front door, smoothing his hair, preparing to bow before the king. He reached for the handle, ready to welcome his savior. He had no idea that the security team outside wasn't there to protect the guest. They were there to secure the perimeter for the woman he had just tried to banish to the scullery. The motorcade had arrived, but the passenger wasn't in the car. She was already inside, standing in a wine-stained suit, waiting for the curtain to rise. The heavy double doors swung open with a theatrical groan, revealing the night. A figure stepped across the threshold, silhouetted against the blinding headlights of the motorcade. It was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit. He held a leather briefcase in one hand and touched a radio earpiece with the other. He looked serious, professional, and expensive. To my family, he looked like salvation. Dante did not hesitate. He launched himself across the foyer, moving with a speed I did not know he possessed. He reached the man before the door had even closed, practically skidding to a halt on the polished marble. He bowed. It was not a polite nod. It was a deep, obsequious bend of the waist that bordered on comical. "Welcome, Sir Dante." Breathless, his eyes wide with adoration. "Welcome to the Jenkins estate. We are beyond honored. We are humbled that a man of your stature would grace us with his presence." Grandma Lucille was right behind him, moving surprisingly fast for a woman who claimed to need a cane. She shoved a waiter aside to get to the front of the line, beaming a smile that showed all her teeth. "Mr. CEO," she gushed, clasping her hands together. "I am Lucille, the matriarch of this family. Please come in. Come in out of the cold. We have prepared a feast fit for a king. We have the finest champagne chilling just for you." I stood just 6 feet away, leaning against a marble pillar, dabbing at the drying wine stain on my white jacket. I watched this farce unfold with a dry amusement. The man they were bowing to was Marcus. He was my chief of staff. He was a brilliant administrator and a loyal employee, but he was certainly not the CEO. He made a very comfortable salary, but he answered to me. Marcus looked bewildered. He blinked, stepping back slightly as Dante tried to grab his hand and shake it vigorously. Marcus looked around the room, his eyes scanning the crowd over Dante's shoulder. He was looking for his boss. He was looking for me. Sir, please, Dante continued, not letting Marcus get a word in. Let me take your coat. Let me take your briefcase. You must be exhausted from running a global empire. My sister-in-law Courtney will get you a drink. Anything you want. Scotch, bourbon, the blood of a virgin. We have it all. Courtney rushed forward, fluttering her eyelashes. Oh, yes, sir. I am Courtney. I am the one who organized this entire evening. Please tell me you like the flowers. I picked them myself to match your brand colors. Marcus finally managed to pull his hand away from Dante's sweaty grip. He adjusted his tie, looking uncomfortable. Excuse me, he said, his voice polite but firm. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Dante laughed, a loud, nervous sound. A misunderstanding. You are too modest, sir. A titan of industry is always humble. We know who you are. We know you are here to sign the deal of the century. I put the napkin in my pocket and crossed my arms. It was like watching a slow-motion car crash. They were so desperate to see power that they were projecting it onto the first suit they saw. They were ignoring the woman in the custom Tom Ford tuxedo standing right next to them, because in their minds, power could not look like me. Power could not have dark skin and a wine stain. Power had to be a man in a gray suit. Marcus looked past Dante's head and finally locked eyes with me. His expression shifted from confusion to relief. He started to step toward me, but Grandma Lucille blocked his path, unaware she was obstructing the very person she wanted to impress. "Do not look over there, sir," she whispered, gesturing vaguely at me without turning her head. "That is just the help. She had a little accident with the wine. Ignore her. She is nobody. Please look at the architecture. Look at the legacy of the Jenkins family." I let out a soft laugh. She had just called the owner of the company nobody while blocking the path of her employee. The irony was so rich it was almost suffocating. Marcus looked at me, raising an eyebrow in a silent question. I gave him a tiny, barely perceptible nod. Let them play their game for one more minute, I thought. Let them dig the hole just a little bit deeper. Marcus gently removed Dante's hand from his sleeve, as if he were peeling off a sticky piece of tape. He did not speak to the frantic man. He did not acknowledge Grandma Lucille's offer of vintage champagne or Courtney's desperate fluttering eyelashes. He simply adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and looked past them. His eyes were fixed on a point in the shadows, near the marble column, where the light from the chandelier faded into the gloom. He began to walk. It was a purposeful military stride. The 5 bodyguards who had entered behind him fell into step, moving like a single organism. They parted the sea of black tuxedos and evening gowns without saying a word. The guests scrambled out of the way, pressing themselves against the walls, sensing a shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. Dante turned around, confused. He watched as the man he thought was the CEO walked straight toward the kitchen doors, straight toward the person he had called trash just moments ago. "Oh, good," Dante whispered to Courtney, a nervous smile flickering on his lips. "He is going to tell her to leave. He is going to have security throw her out personally. That is leadership. That is how you handle the help." Marcus stopped 3 feet in front of me. He ignored the serving tray on the table. He ignored the guests whispering behind their hands. He looked at me standing there with my arms crossed and wine dripping from my hem. The room held its breath. The silence was absolute. Even the string quartet had stopped playing their bows, hovering inches above the strings. And then the impossible happened. Marcus brought his heels together with a sharp, audible click. He placed his hands at his sides, palms flat against his trousers. And then, in front of the entire frozen assembly of Atlanta's elite, he bent at the waist. It was not a casual nod. It was not a polite greeting. It was a deep, respectful 90-degree bow. The 5 massive bodyguards behind him followed suit, bowing in perfect unison, like a wave crashing against the shore. They remained bent, doubling over, as if in the presence of royalty. Dante's mouth fell open. Grandma Lucille dropped her purse. Courtney let out a small, strangled squeak. They stayed bowed for a long, respectful second before rising. Marcus looked me in the eye, his expression pained and apologetic. "Madam Chairwoman," he said, his voice clear and projecting to every corner of the silent hall, "please accept our deepest apologies for the delay." The motorcade was held up by the press at the perimeter. "We failed to secure your arrival time. It is a failure of protocol that will not happen again." Then his eyes dropped to my chest. He saw the dark, jagged stain of the Cabernet ruining the white silk of my custom Tom Ford tuxedo. His face hardened. The polite administrator vanished, replaced by the cold steel of a loyal lieutenant. He reached out and brushed the air near the lapel, as if afraid to touch the desecration. "Madam President, who did this to you?" His voice was low, but it carried a threat that made the nearby guests shiver. "Who dared to dirty your suit?" I looked at Marcus, and then I looked over his shoulder at my brother. I saw the color drain from Dante's face until he looked like a corpse. He had spent all night waiting for the CEO. He had spent his life waiting for a savior. He never realized that the person he was waiting for was the sister he had tried to bury. The room spun around them, but I stood still, the center of their new terrifying universe. The silence that followed Marcus's question was heavier than the marble columns supporting the roof. It was a vacuum that sucked the oxygen right out of the room, leaving everyone gasping. The string quartet had stopped playing mid-note, and the only sound was the hum of the air conditioning, which suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. 500 eyes were locked on me, and for the first time in 5 years, they weren't looking at me with pity or disdain. They were looking at me with fear. Grandma Lucille was the first to succumb to the pressure. Her hand, which had been gripping her vintage champagne flute with white-knuckled intensity, simply gave up. Her fingers opened. The crystal glass fell in what felt like slow motion, turning end over end, catching the light of the chandelier before it struck the floor. The crash was explosive, shattering the silence like a gunshot. Champagne splashed across the hem of her gown and onto her orthopedic shoes, but she didn't flinch. She didn't even look down. Her mouth hung open slightly, working silently as her brain tried to process the impossible image of the most powerful man in the room bowing to her scapegoat granddaughter. Courtney was standing a few feet away, frozen in a posture of retreat. The color had drained from her face so completely that her expensive makeup stood out like a mask. Her eyes were fixed on the wine stain she had just inflicted on my jacket. A minute ago, that stain was a symbol of her dominance, a petty mark of shame on a poor relation. Now she realized with a sick lurch of her stomach that she had just physically assaulted the chairwoman of Vulcan Robotics. I could see the terror rising in her throat. She knew that I could buy her husband's debt and foreclose on her house before the salad course was served. But it was Dante who broke the spell. His mind simply snapped. The reality was too big, too heavy, and too contradictory for his fragile ego to accept. He looked at Marcus, then at me, and let out a laugh. It was a high-pitched, jagged sound that bordered on hysteria. "Chairwoman." He stepped forward, his hands shaking as he pointed a finger at me. "You are confused. You are making a mistake. A hilarious mistake." He turned to the crowd looking for validation, begging the room to agree with him. "Tell him. Someone tell him. This is Ebony. She is not a chairwoman. She is a mechanic." He grabbed the sleeve of Marcus's expensive suit, tugging at it like a petulant child. "She fixes cars. She changes oil. She drives a dirty truck and lives in a rental. I hired her to park the cars tonight. She is the valet. Do you hear me? She is the help." Dante looked back at me, his eyes wide and wild, desperate for me to shrink back into the box he had built for me. "Tell him, Ebony. Tell him you are a nobody. Stop playing this game. It is not funny anymore." I stood perfectly still, letting his frantic words hang in the air. The more he spoke, the more he sounded like a madman, raving at the moon. The guests were pulling away from him, looking at him with a mixture of embarrassment and pity. He was screaming at a titan, calling her a peasant, and in doing so, he was digging his own grave with his tongue. Marcus slowly peeled Dante's hand off his sleeve, treating him like a contaminant. He looked at Dante with cold, professional indifference. I am not the one who is confused, Sir Marcus said, his voice cutting through the hysteria. The woman you are pointing at is the founder of the company that owns the mortgage on this house. She is not the help, she is the landlord. And I suggest you lower your voice before security removes you from her property. I stepped onto the raised platform at the front of the room. The microphone hummed as I tapped it once, a sound that echoed like a gavel striking a judge's bench. The room was deathly silent. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me. They looked at the wine stain on my white Tom Ford jacket, but they no longer saw a mess. They saw a battle scar. They saw power. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not need cables or technicians. With a single swipe of my thumb, I hijacked the projection system. The massive screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of the Jenkins family crest, flickered and went black. A second later, a high-resolution image appeared. It was a digital scan of a legal document. The quitclaim deed. I looked down at Dante. He was standing near the buffet table, his face the color of old ash. He looked small. He looked like a man who knew the executioner had just tightened the noose. You wanted a business meeting, Dante? I said, my voice amplified and crystal clear. You wanted to discuss the sale of the Ridgeland. You told everyone here that you were going to close the deal of the century tonight. But there is a small problem with your business plan. I swiped my phone screen again. The image zoomed in on the signature line at the bottom of the deed. You cannot sell what you do not own. I continued, my voice calm and conversational. And you certainly cannot sell land based on a document you forged. That is my signature, Dante. Or rather, it is your poor attempt at tracing my signature from a birthday card I gave you 10 years ago. We ran a forensic analysis. The ink pressure points do not match. The slant is wrong. It is a clumsy felony committed by a desperate man. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Grandma Lucille put a hand to her chest. Courtney looked like she was going to be sick. Dante tried to speak. He opened his mouth to deny it, to scream that I was lying, but no sound came out. He was paralyzed by the undeniable truth glowing in high definition behind me. But I am a businesswoman, Dante, I said, leaning casually against the podium. And I know that in business everything is for sale. So I did some shopping this morning. I did not buy the land. The land was already mine. Instead, I called your creditors. I swiped the screen again. A new list appeared. It was a spreadsheet. A long, terrifying list of numbers in red: gambling debts, crypto losses, high-interest personal loans, the second mortgage on this house, the lease on your Mercedes, even the loan for Courtney's engagement ring. You have been very busy digging a hole, Dante. $5 million worth of dirt. I paused, letting the number hang in the air. $5 million. The banks were very happy to speak with me, I said. They considered your debt toxic, high risk. They were thrilled when Vulcan Robotics offered to purchase the entire portfolio for pennies on the dollar. So here is the reality of the situation. I am not buying the land from you. I bought you. I looked him dead in the eye. I own your debt. I own your car. I own the clothes on your back. And as of this morning, I own this house. I am not your sister anymore, Dante. I am your creditor, and I am calling in the loan. You have 24 hours to pay me $5 million in full, or you get out of my house. The choice is yours. Grandma Lucille shuffled toward the edge of the stage. She looked frail and suddenly very old. She reached out a trembling hand, trying to touch the hem of my ruined jacket. Her eyes were wet with tears that I knew she could summon on command. Ebony, honey, she pleaded, her voice cracking. You have to understand. I did everything for you. I was hard on you because I wanted you to be strong. I wanted to prepare you for this cruel world. Deep down, you know that, right? You are my granddaughter. You are the pride of the Jenkins line. I looked down at her. For years I would have killed for those words. Now they just sounded like static. I smiled, a cold, humorless curve of my lips. No, Grandma, I said softly. Do not lie to yourself. I was never your pride. I was your shame. I was the dark stain you tried to scrub away. You hid me in the kitchen. You made me park cars. You wanted me to be invisible. I leaned closer so only she could hear the final verdict. Well, congratulations, Grandma. You finally got your wish. I am going to remove your shame permanently. I am going to disappear from your life completely. And I am taking this house with me. Sheriff Miller did not need to be called. He had been waiting in the wings, listening to every word of my presentation. He stepped through the crowd, the metallic jingle of handcuffs at his belt, cutting through the murmurs of the guests. He walked straight up to Dante, who was still trembling from my financial death blow. Dante Jenkins, the sheriff, said, his voice booming. You are under arrest for felony forgery, wire fraud, and identity theft. The cold steel snapped around Dante's wrists before he could even raise his hands. That sound broke him completely. He did not cry. He exploded with venom. He spun around, twisting his body to point a shackled hand at his wife. It was her. Dante screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. It was Courtney. She made me do it. She needed the money for her parties. She told me to trace the signature. Do not arrest me. Arrest her. She is the one you want. Courtney gasped, stepping back as if slapped. The husband who promised to protect her was now using her as a human shield. I watched the police drag him away, kicking and screaming, while his wife stood alone in the center of the room, realizing she had married a monster. The Jenkins dynasty did not just fall, it tore itself apart. Courtney stood trembling in the middle of the foyer, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her ankles. She reached out toward me, her hands grasping at the air as if she could physically pull back the luxury she was losing. Please, Ebony, she sobbed, her voice thin and pathetic. You cannot do this. You cannot kick me out. I have nowhere to go. This is my home. I looked at her with pity, not for her situation, but for her blindness. I reached into the pocket of my ruined white trousers and pulled out a single crumpled bill. It was a $50 note. It was the money she had promised to pay me 3 weeks ago for clearing the brush money she had conveniently forgotten because she needed a manicure. I pressed the bill into her shaking palm, closing her fingers around it. Courtney, I said, my voice steady. You owe me for the landscaping work, but I am feeling generous. Take this $50. It should be enough for a taxi to a motel. You have exactly 1 hour to pack your bags and get off my property before I change the locks. The ride is over. The view from the 45th floor of the Vulcan Robotics headquarters was breathtaking. Below me, the city of Atlanta sprawled out like a circuit board of light and motion, but my eyes were drawn to the south. There, in the distance, I could see the massive gleaming structure of the new Gigafactory. It sat on the very ridge where I used to cut grass, where I used to dream of planting carrots. Now it was planting the seeds of the future, producing automation technology that was changing the world. The office was quiet save for the soft hum of the climate control and the distant murmur of the engineering team in the conference room behind me. It was a peaceful silence, a earned silence. My personal phone buzzed on the glass desk. It was a sound I rarely heard anymore, as most people knew to go through Marcus. I picked it up. The screen illuminated with a message from an unknown number. I did not have to guess who it was. The preview text told me everything I needed to know. Ebony, honey. It is Grandma Lucille. My arthritis is flaring up, and the state pension does not cover the good medication. I know we had our differences, but blood is thicker than water. Please send whatever you can. We are staying at a motel on the highway, and it is so cold here. I stared at the words. A year ago, that message would have sent me spiraling. I would have felt the crushing weight of obligation, the desperate need to buy their affection to prove I was good enough. I would have sent the money, and they would have hated me for it. But as I read it now, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no guilt. It was just text on a screen. Ghost stories from a life I no longer lived. Blood is not thicker than water, I thought. Blood is just biology. Loyalty is a choice. Respect is earned. And love is an action, not a weapon to be used for extortion. I did not type a reply. I did not ask how Dante was doing in prison, or if Courtney had found a new victim to leech off of. I simply lifted my thumb and pressed the block button. The message vanished. The connection was severed. The ghost was exorcised. I placed the phone face down and turned away from the window. I walked toward the open door of the conference room. Inside, a dozen of the brightest minds in the industry were arguing passionately over the schematics for a new hydraulic joint. They were diverse, brilliant, and driven. When I walked in, the room fell silent, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect. Marcus looked up from the blueprints and smiled. We were just discussing the torque ratios, boss. We think we can increase efficiency by 15% if we redesign the actuator. I looked at the faces around the table. These people challenged me. They supported me. They built with me. Excellent, I said, pulling out a chair. Let us get to work. I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I belonged. I wasn't the help. I wasn't the bank. I was home. True family isn't defined by the name you inherit, but by the people who stand by you when you have nothing to offer but yourself. Ebony spent her life trying to purchase the love of people who only saw her as a resource. Her journey teaches us that you cannot beg for your seat at the table. Sometimes you have to build your own table and invite the people who actually respect you to sit down. Your worth is not determined by how much you can give to others, but by how much you value yourself. Walking away from toxicity is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. If you enjoyed seeing Ebony rise from the ashes and claim her power, hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded of their own worth today.